Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Puranamunina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashaadhyayinim Ambatva Manusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanaya Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you for joining us again. Last week we covered verse 1 of chapter 16, and today we will complete the list of virtues that Krishna was talking about. Last time he covered 9 in the first verse, and we're going to have 17 more today to complete the 26 virtues that are called Daivi Sampat, or the divine wealth. And Krishna provides this list of virtues for a particular reason, which is preparation for assimilating the non-dual philosophy of Vedanta. If you didn't know, that is basically Amma's core teachings. I mean, there's nothing other than non-dualism, of course, but Amma adds in a lot of these virtues in her teachings. She emphasizes that for most of us because plunging headlong into non-dual philosophy is a very difficult task. So start with virtues, and as Krishna teaches us, they help us assimilate the more difficult teachings. Now, this list of 26 virtues is not by any stretch of the imagination an exhaustive list. There are many qualities that were mentioned before in the Gita, and more will be mentioned later in the Gita. But all put together, whatever chapter it is from, all these qualities are called the divine wealth because they make a person divine. So divine wealth makes us divine, so to speak. We're no longer simply a human being, but we become a truly humane being, a divine being, if you will. How so? Because to the extent that we embody divine qualities, we can be considered a manifestation of divinity. In fact, if people tell you, why do you like Amma so much? It's an easy response. You say there's all these qualities that we think are really wonderful and divine, you know, but nobody actually manifests those. Nobody practices those. If you had somebody that had manifested all those qualities perfectly, wouldn't you think that they're special? You could even say they're divine. So that's a nice way of thinking of the virtues. They help us come closer to God. Or for us, it's more important to be closer to Amma, but it's the same thing in principle. All the qualities that we love most about Amma can actually be felt in other people too, just to a much lesser degree. So but we still feel like those people are somewhat closer to Amma or closer to God because they're practicing and they're walking the talk. So, in such people, the sublime teachings of the Upanishads, the most exalted scriptures, they become tangible to some degree. We can kind of feel those teachings be alive in somebody who's practicing them. And that helps us really understand the practical application of those teachings. So when I first started my ashram life in Amritapuri, my immediate role models were the elder brothers with whom I spent most of my time, because it was, most of the time was seva and studying and doing all these very scheduled routine. And Amma's not there most of the time, but when there's a exceptional time she comes out to do seva, then we would all be with Amma. But a lot of the times I was following their lead. And I must say that I both respected and feared some of the brahmacharis, my elder brothers. And there were 3 in particular that fit in that category. And they were Jay Kumar, Vijay Kumar, and Ponnuswami. So now they are known as Swami Yogamritananda Ji, Swami Vivektamrita Ji, and Swami Vinayamritananda Ji. Wonderful people for decades, and I still have a lot of respect for them. But of course, Amma was the true role model. But at the time, I didn't really understand that Amma could also be our best friend. So I sought that friendship in them. And for some time, I followed their lead and tried to emulate everything they were doing, which turned out to be impossible, actually. I had no clue. So actually, on occasion, I found myself hiding from them because they were too pure, or they had so much energy, and even no matter what it was, they would do it until it was done. And somewhere along the way, I just ran out of gas. I won't hide that, and I would just excuse myself because I was the white boy. They let me do that, I guess. I'm not proud of that, but that's how it was. And I had no clue just how much more of a challenge it was going to be to try and emulate Amma. That's a whole nother story. But one thing is for sure, if we take the virtues that we learn in this chapter and we make them our own, it brings us closer to Amma, so to speak, because we attune ourselves to her. That means that we are able to assimilate her teachings, and the closer we come to her, the more we will be able to assimilate the most profound teachings. Amma can give any kind of teaching. She can teach somebody how to sit still, like the kids. And then she can teach us an exalted, just amazing teaching if we're ready for it. So the virtues are the key that gives us entry into the secret teachings. Everybody's interested in secret teachings, right? Well, in reality, there are no secret teachings, only open secrets. We don't perceive them because we haven't cultivated the proper qualities to appreciate and pursue such teachings. People look for siddhis, a lot of these supernatural powers and everything, but they don't mean anything, actually, sorry to say. On the spiritual path, they don't help you advance. Typically, people get arrogant and then they go backwards. But the amazing teachings that Amma can give us, we first have to appreciate them and then pursue them and then practice them. So we'll cover a little bit more about that during today's class. Let's resume the verses by chanting verse 2. And as the normal normal pattern has been, I will repeat the words. You can repeat them after me, and then we will chant it all together as we would chant the verse in full. Ahimsa Satyama Krodhas Tyaga Shantir Apaishunam Deya Bhuteshvaloluptamam Mardhavam Hirachapalam. Then together very slowly. Ahimsa Satyama Krodha Tyaga Shantir Apaishunam Deya Bhuteshvalo Luptvam Mardavam Hirachapalam. I will make a few changes in the English rendition. Non-violence, truthfulness, absence of anger, renunciation, tranquility, absence of, if you prefer, calumny, okay, otherwise you can substitute slanderousness, compassion, uncovetousness, gentleness, modesty, and steadiness. Or if you prefer, absence of fickleness, okay. A lot of these translations are kind of like Victorian English because the original, actually Bhagavad Gita was translated into English the first time in 1785. But most of the extant and more commonly used translations are from the British scholars from about over 100 years ago, so it's kind of archaic English. It just sticks, even though this is a more modern rendition, that original language and jargon tends to persist. So these are 11 qualities, and we're going to go through each one of them and understand what they really mean, because not only do we have Sanskrit words that are being translated into English, also those words, the Sanskrit word and the English translation, they don't exactly necessarily capture the meaning in the scripture, because you have multiple derivations. So let's look at ahimsa, which is the first word. We sometimes call it non-violence, but if you say non-violence, it's like, I'm not violent to anybody. That may be true, but ahimsa has a much broader meaning, which is like harmlessness. Himsa means harming. So ahimsa means you don't harm anybody. Now, can we say that? With our thoughts, words, and actions, we don't hurt anybody? Or we could say non-injuriousness. Have you injured anybody? Not physically, but their feelings. So Shankaracharya has a important clarification, which is it's abstaining from causing harm to living beings. I mean, that means a tree, of course. And Amma takes it farther. She says, even like a rock, you shouldn't just carelessly hit it with a hammer for no reason. So, but Shankaracharya says, at least living beings, that's a pretty broad request or insistence that we cause harm to everything. Jnanadev has, as usual, many beautiful words to share today. And here he says, to conduct oneself bodily, in speech, and in mind, with the sole object of making the world happy. That is ahimsa. That's not what you would get out of Wikipedia if you look up ahimsa. It's not going to say that. It just means don't hurt anybody. Most likely violent, or avoid violence. And then he goes on to say, like the bud of a jasmine flower, which although pointed is soft by nature, or like the moonlight, which is gleaming but very cool and soothing to all. These examples that he gives are so perfect. If you remember, we did look at ahimsa in chapter 13 also in great depth. So, like I said a moment ago, it's not harming people physically, mentally either, but through thought, word, or deed. Amma says that when we have negative thoughts, those thoughts reach the other person and affect them, and that comes back to us as karma. So not only is it bad for your spiritual growth, it's also creating unwanted bad karma. if you put all these together, Amma's teachings and the Gita's teachings. That means that we have to have a lot of sensitivity to people's feelings. And to have sensitivity means we have to have a lot of patience and forbearance. And that's why in chapter 13, patience is the word that comes after ahimsa, or non-injury, in the same verse. And in this chapter, patience or forbearance comes in the next verse. So they're very close to each other. You cannot avoid harm if you don't have any forbearance. That's the point. And forbearance is needed not only before we talk or before we or while we are talking with somebody, but even afterwards, because you say something to somebody and they may say something back. And if they're upset about what you said, then they may say something spiteful towards us. So if we don't have forbearance, it's dangerous because we may retaliate. And then you have this endless cycle, which nobody enjoys. So ahimsa is impossible without patience, forbearance, and forgiveness. As an example, when Amma first started building the free houses for people that are struggling families, etc., she gave the first houses to the people who were the most merciless detractors of the ashram in the early days. Just because that area is so underdeveloped, if you've been there, I mean now these days it's a lot of difference. But when this project was starting, it was really bad, still very bad. And so she gave the houses to those people immediately because she felt compassion for them. But it also means that she had a tremendous amount of forgiveness and forbearance. The next word is Sattyam. A lot of people know what that means. It means truth. And Shankaracharya, again, has a very important clarification. Speaking in accordance with facts is truth, as well as avoiding what is unpleasant and false. So that word, unpleasant truth, Amma has used it many times. She tells us we should not speak the hurtful truth. Jnanadev, again, has many beautiful metaphors. The words that prove as hard as iron and cutting through doubts should also sound sweet to the ears, so much so that the ears should grow mouths on them to taste the sweetness of those words. Who thinks of things like that? I never thought of a mouth coming out of an ear just to listen to Amma's bhajans, but actually, yeah, my ears should have mouths so they could drink down the sweetness of Amma's bhajans too. Speech, this is continuation. Speech should not mislead anyone, even though pleasant and sweet, and also should not prick the feelings of others, even though true. The deer hunter's song is sweet to the ears, but it proves disastrous to the deer. Never speak the offensive plain truth when it is devastating like fire. Then there is speech that is sweet to hear, but its import cuts the listener's heart to pieces. Such words are far from being eloquent, more like demonical behavior. A mother shows anger when her child commits a shameful act, but while scolding the child, she is more tender than a flower. Speech should be like a mother's words, pleasing to hear, wholesome in their consequence, and free from any tinge of bad feelings. He's just captured it, how we should speak. And this is exactly how Amma speaks. Every day you'll see her talking with the kids like that. And she will be a little forceful and then immediately smiles afterwards. And one other commentator has said, truth is in directing one's mind, speech, and action to the glorification of God. And his rationale is that God is the truth. So why not dedicate your mind, speech, and action to the glorification of God? Then everything is going to be true. The emphasis is not on speaking. Some people think they have to talk a lot to speak about the truth. But it's what it is if you are speaking, may it be the truth. And that means that an unspeakable truth should never be discussed. So there's only two options: either keep quiet or speak the truth, the unhurtful truth. And it's been said that truthfulness is simply harmony between thoughts and words, which becomes actually a subset of what we talked about last week, which is arjavam. And the definition of that was the alignment of thought, word, and deed. So Sattyam is just the alignment of thought and words, so it's a subset of arjavam. So arjavam covers all of it. It means straightforwardness, arjavam. So what if you are tempted to speak an untruth to protect an innocent person other than yourself? Interestingly, that falls into a category called apat dharma, which means crisis dharma. And it becomes allowed. But to make sure that it doesn't become a habit and we become the judge and jury and all that, we should pay a price for doing that because it's not a good habit. So we should actually kind of willingly punish ourselves by chanting our mantra extra times, this many times more than you normally would, or you're going to forego a meal, or you're going to observe silence for a little while, just to make sure that you don't always tell these little white lies. But our sacrifice can restore the alignment of our thoughts, words, and actions. Third word was akrodaha, which means the absence of anger. Krodha is anger. If you're not familiar with Sanskrit, that that comes at the beginning usually negates whatever comes after it. And the reason why there are so many words being negated in these verses is because getting closer to God, getting closer to Amma means relinquishing things that don't belong there. Because the Atman, our true self, is already full. We don't need to embellish it or decorate it with anything. We need to remove the things that don't belong there, the things that are the impurities, the foreign elements. So, is he angry? No, that doesn't belong in the Atman. So you say akrodaha, non-anger. It seems a little tedious. Everything is non-this, non-that, but it's things that we have within us, so we need to face those and figure out how to uproot them. So absence of anger, Shankaracharya says, it is stopping anger from arising even when maligned or beaten up by others. That is not easy. Jnanadev says, with his beautiful metaphors, no sprouts will form on a rock, even if it is watered copiously. We can never get any butter by churning porridge. Porridge is just like oatmeal. You're not going to get butter. You need milk to do that, right? The sky cannot yield flowers even in the spring. Pouring ghee into the ashes of an extinguished fire will not make the fire blaze forth again. In the same way, even if someone were to speak volumes of incendiary language, it would not create any fury in the one who is devoid of anger. Just as a dead body cannot rise again, even if you beg the Creator prostrating before Him. We're not talking about zombie movies, okay? So in real life, they're not going to come back to life. Another commentator says, anger makes its appearance when we feel that others do not fulfill our expectations. This is not something to tell other people. When someone expects something of you, you say, hey, all your anger is coming because you have the wrong expectations of me. That is a bad application of this teaching. Only apply it to yourself. And if you have a spouse or family members, it's dangerous to your health to try and apply it to others. In other words, he says, when our desires are obstructed, anger arises. But when we remain unaffected by the behavior of others, we do not fall a victim to anger. He's giving us the solution also. So lack of anger doesn't mean that it's not there at all. It means you quieten the mind when it arises. So that's there's a commentary about that as well. And we're going to find out about something even deeper later. But for now, it's quietening the mind after anger has got a foothold somewhere. So when it comes into the mind first, then what happens is that it goes into our hands, they might start shaking, or they go into our legs, and we walk over somewhere and shout at them. Our legs are in the service of our anger at that time, right? So how do we pull all this back? Amma says it's by knowing that anger is not only useless, it is also harmful to ourselves and others. So it's a big obstacle on the path of spirituality. We could even think of it as public enemy number one, or private enemy number one, for that matter. Because it hurts us and others, and then we feel bad about hurting other people, and we get more karma, and we're feeding the fire of anger. So it's just like a perpetual chain. So it has been, Amma talks about it as like poison. She says it's craziness. Some people say it's like an addictive drug that becomes more and more intense and habitual over time. And after a while, if we're always angry, people just stop listening to us because it's like a broken record. So then we have to get even more angry to get their attention. So there's no good coming out of it at all. And then some people might say, but then isn't that going to be suppression of anger because it's an emotion you're feeling? Well, perhaps if that person has no other recourse. But remember that word suppression, according to this philosophy, is something that comes from outside. It means it's not based on understanding of a proper understanding of your situation. Amma says happiness is a choice. So if you forget or you don't even understand, you don't even know, you've never heard that teaching that happiness is a choice, you wouldn't think of it. And then you would just have to suppress your anger. That's not healthy, of course. That's only because you don't know why, or you're afraid of the consequences if you get mad. But once we're truly convinced of the harmful effects of anger, not only on ourselves but on others, then it's no longer suppression. We just have to remember that conviction. And until then, well, we have to go through many painful experiences in life. I really can identify because I used to be such an angry person, but I'm not anymore, okay, leave me alone. I used to be a very angry person, and I was very quick to shout at people and scold them and yell, all that stuff. So, yes, I have been through part of it, still a long ways to go. The next term was tyaga, which means renunciation, or some call it abandonment, because renunciation sometimes hurts people's feelings, whatever you prefer. It was also already mentioned just in the previous verse, but as an aside under the point of charity, which was dhanam. And Jnanadev says, he has this beautiful way of providing a few samples or examples, and then he says, if you renounce this, or if you relinquish this, then you're actually renouncing all these things also. So he's trying to, instead of thinking I'm going to renounce vanilla ice cream, then I'm going to renounce chocolate ice cream, I'm going to renounce strawberry ice cream. Why don't you just renounce ice cream? So that's the basic principle behind all those examples, right? So he's giving us further examples to help us understand that you don't have to renounce every single thing in the universe. You renounce certain principles, certain ways of thinking, and that helps you renounce so many more things. I'll give you a few of his examples. If you renounce clay, you're renouncing all the pottery. If you renounce thread, you're renouncing fabric, because there's no such thing as fabric without thread. And if you renounce a seed, you're renouncing the tree. So understanding the cause and effect is enough. Then you realize this is the cause of my suffering, not all these other things. The fact that I'm dependent on all these material or people in the world, that's why I'm suffering. So I'm going to renounce the notion that I'm getting satisfaction from all these things, that I'm hoarding or seeking or whatever. So you don't have to renounce every single object. Just grasp the fundamental idea and renounce that. That's the shortcut. And that's what he's trying to guide us to. And there's a progression, if you hadn't already noticed. The first step is charity, because you're not renouncing everything. You're giving a few things away. And in the Kathopanishad, Nachiketa's father, not Shripad, there was a boy thousands of years ago who was the main character of the Kathopanishad. His father was doing a big ceremony, and he gave away all these things that he didn't need, like old cows that could hardly stand up, not giving any milk. So that is not a way to relinquish your attachment. It's like donating your garbage or something. So dhanam really means giving away something that's good and helpful to somebody else, but doesn't say anything about relinquishing the attachment to it necessarily. So tyaga is relinquishing that attachment. And then moksha is liberation from all concepts of that sort. So you could say dhanam, or the charity, is the rehearsal, and tyaga or renunciation is the opening night, and then moksha is the climax. And Shankaracharya says that even though he says it means, tyaga means sannyasa to him, but we know from what Amma says that a householder qualifies as a sannyasi or sannyasini if they practice internal renunciation. Anybody can do it. You don't wear the robes, but that's the easy part, wearing the robes, right? So it's how you actually feel and how you live. You can be a householder sannyasi. That's why Amma calls it grihasthashrama. Your house is an ashram. The next quality is Shanti. Everybody knows what that is, peace. We can also think of it as tranquility, inner tranquility. And Shankaracharya calls it calmness of the mind. You have a very calm mind. Jnanadev takes it to the next level. Beautiful examples which sometimes are hard to follow, but once you figure them out, they just make you want to meditate on them. He says, when one of knowledge and knowledge itself both secure the object of knowledge, which is to know yourself, and then they themselves get extinguished because they've fulfilled their purpose, that state is called peacefulness. And then he talks about the pralaya kalam, which is the pralaya is when the whole universe is dissolved into nothingness. There's still consciousness, so there's still Brahman, but there's no material universe anymore. So that period of that time when the whole universe is dissolved, that's called the pralaya. And he uses that as an example beautifully. The waters of the deluge at the time of pralaya, dissolution, drown the entire universe and pervade everywhere. Then remains no trace of individual terms, such as source, current, or the sea. The only thing left is one uniform sheet of water everywhere. There is no one left to know of that state of deluge. Of course, eventually the water also is destroyed, but it's said that the destruction comes through water somehow. I don't understand. Anyhow, in that way, he says, with the attainment of the object of knowledge, the state of being the knower also ceases to exist because you realize that you are the knower. So there's no duality, so there's nothing to know. What is left behind is simply peacefulness. Now, if someone was to say to you, what is peace? You wouldn't give this kind of a description, I don't think. Now you might. But it's a tremendously profound way of looking at it. Now, coming back to earth, on a practical level for us, it means just mental quietude. We're not haunted by negative thoughts, so we can entertain peaceful thoughts instead. Apaishunam, it's a little difficult to pronounce. It's another one of those long phrases, an absence of slanderousness, which sounds like you just don't read those tabloids or whatever, or don't write articles for tabloids. But it goes much deeper, especially according to Jnanadev. Shankaracharya puts it simply, it means not exposing the weaknesses of others to a third person. That is a wonderful rule. Just think how much better the world would be, how few misunderstandings and hurt feelings there would be. It works everywhere, especially in communities, because people like to talk about when they're upset about something. You can talk about somebody, a third party, in a negative way to a second party, and it's just not good for anybody. So it's a good rule for everybody to follow. If you have something to say, you should at least have the courage to say it to them yourself. Don't go around telling other people. That's the idea. And Jnanadev, get ready for this, he has like a whole another level of interpretation of this simple phrase of absence of slanderousness. Okay, here it goes. A good physician keenly desirous of curing a malady does not pause before giving treatment to find out if the patient is an acquaintance or a stranger. Seeing a cow stuck in mud, we would feel greatly distraught by her suffering without pausing to see if she's able to produce milk or not. A person full of compassion, seeing someone drowning in water, thinks only of saving their life without asking what their social status is. In that way, those who are devoid of slanderousness give away everything to who are ignorant and full of imperfections. We qualify to receive it, right? Such high-souled ones communicate through their benevolent disposition and make the suffering people forget their miseries. Now it starts to sound like Amma. By their auspicious glance, they remove the weak points in others and then regard them as good people. You make them good and then you say, oh, this is a good person. In that way, by their own merit, they first make up the deficiency in others and then look at them with kindness. I mean, it's said that that's what a real master avatar can do. The average guru only can receive or welcome the top level disciples, because it's hard to pick up somebody who's got all the bad habits and everything and turn them into a saint. But it's said that an avatar, and we can say Amma, can do that. If you heard the talk this morning, it was so beautiful. All the struggles this guy went through and how he ended up being with Amma. And he's not crying either. He's just like so bright and cheerful now. So we had that satsang, and it shows, and he said that Amma even saved his life multiple times without him knowing. Now back to Jnanadev's commentary. The tendency of such a person, that person who has an absence of slanderousness, the tendency of such a person is to raise up those who have fallen down and also to support them, but they never think of harming anyone. Their vision never engages in fault finding. All these constitute absence of slanderousness. And he adds something at the end which I never would have imagined, but I think it's a very important thing for us to remember. referring to absence of slanderousness, he says, understand that this is a primary place of refuge on the road to liberation. Understand that this is a primary place of refuge on the road to liberation. And this is a liberated person saying it. So in common explanation, we could say we just don't publicize other people's weaknesses and negativities. Even if your mind, because our mind is always looking at negative things, even though we only want to look at the good things, but negative things, thoughts will happen, right? So what do? We can't say we're not going to have any negative thoughts about people. So what we can do as a Band-Aid or a first aid reaction, we consult the intellect and we say, is this something worth telling someone else? Is this guy really a bad person? Is she really mean? Or is it just the mood I was in at that time? And we can consult the intellect, and I also ask, what am I about to say? Is it really necessary to say it? Or is it just unnecessary? It's just going to make the other person feel bad too. So we can talk about our own weaknesses, but not others. That's the point. And also we can remember that the mind's tendency to criticize others is really just a gimmick to make us feel like we've made some progress. But really what we're doing is we're going backwards when we criticize other people, especially not to their face. So it's better to talk about the goodness of other people, or just maunam is even better. The next quality was daya, or compassion. Shankaracharya says it's kindness, pity to all beings in distress. So not just all beings in distress. Jnanadev, again, beautiful here. It is like the full moon in daytime, making no distinctions, such as this is an insignificant or great person, while she dispenses comforting coolness. Similarly, while relieving the miseries of beings in distress, the compassionate one never feels any prejudice, such as this one is better or this one is worse. Even water, while completely exhausting itself, keeps the withering plant alive. In that way, they feel so much compassion for the sufferings of others, so they consider it a very small sacrifice to give all their possessions in securing relief for the suffering. A flow of water comes across a ditch in its course, but it doesn't stop. A flow of water that comes across a ditch in its course does not proceed a step further before filling up the ditch first. Have you ever thought of that? No, you don't think of that. None of us do. In the same way, the compassionate one takes a step forward only after making the person in front of him contented. A thorn piercing our foot gives pain, which is immediately impressed on our mind. Similarly, their heart feels, the compassionate one feels acute pain at seeing other people's suffering. They feel very happy seeing others happy. Their whole life is for removing the miseries of others, in the way that water slakes the thirst of all beings. Such a person is compassion incarnate, and I feel a lifelong debt to them. So first I thought, wow, then Krishna owes Amma a lifelong debt. And I said, no, Amma's Krishna also, so he doesn't have a debt to himself. Anyhow, it's a nice way of looking at it. It was already mentioned, actually, in chapter 12, verse 13, when Krishna said, it means one who is friendly and compassionate to all beings. It was a reference to a realized being. That's the difference, because in this chapter, it's just referring to a seeker. So he's, even though it sounds like God realization with all these characteristics, but it is presented to us as something that we can attain, even without being God realized. And in chapter 6, verse 32, Krishna said, the highest yogi is one who judges pleasure or pain everywhere by the same standard as he applies to himself. If you do this perfectly, probably that means you're God realized. But as a practice, as a sadhana, anybody can do it. And it's a good way to cultivate even more compassion. So the basic rule, it's like the golden rule from the Bible also, you look at other beings, you look at other beings as you would look at yourself. So when we experience physical suffering, we do the best we can to remove it, and now we have to do the same for everybody else. And that goes even for people who mistreated us or did so in the past. It also means the opposite of helping our so-called enemies. It means if our so-called enemy suffers, we cannot rejoice in that either. So it goes both ways, and that's very hard to do. I mean, I'm told that what's it called, keeping up with the Joneses. You know, somebody buys a new car and then crashes, and that serves him right because he spent all that money on his car when we were just jealous that he had a better car. So we should actually feel their pain as much as we feel our own pain. And I would say that Amma takes it even one step further because she feels others' pain even more than she feels her own pain. Because anyhow, for her the body is separate from her. So she witnesses the pain, but the body is suffering a lot for sure. Once, when a long-time devotee went for darshan, I think it was San Ramon, at least 10 to 15 years ago, he was elderly and he'd been taking a lot of blood thinners, so if you didn't know, when you take blood thinners, it's easy to get bruises on your extremities, especially because you're more likely to hit your arm on something or your leg or foot on something. So when he went for darshan, he had these big bandage on his forearm. And you could see a little bit of bruising protruding from the bandage. And Amma looked at him and said, "What happened to you?" And he says, "It's the blood thinners, Amma. It's just, I don't know what happened. I hit something maybe when I was sleeping. When I woke up, it was all bruised." And Amma said, she was looking, she says, "It looks like it really, does it hurt?" And he said, "No, it doesn't hurt." And he started to take the bandage off to show her. And she said, No, stop. She says, "I can bear any pain of this body, but I can't stand to see the pain of my children." I mean, it's so profound. I mean, we don't think that way, right? So when Shankaracharya adds that all living beings there, it's including everybody, all the plants and even cockroaches, I'm sorry to say, to all who hate cockroaches, mosquitoes, oh my gosh, you mean I can't whack them? Anyhow, as an inspirational story, Amma has told a traditional story it's all over India, but you might not have heard it. It's always good to hear it again anyhow. A saint was taking a bath in a river and he saw a scorpion drowning in the river. So what did he do? He's a saint, So he picked it up and he started walking towards, making his way to the riverbank so he could save it from dying. And what did the scorpion do? I mean, what's it going to do? It's a scorpion. It stung him. And it was so painful, he just, reaction was to drop it. It was a reflex. But he picked it up again and walked a few more steps towards the bank, and he got stung again. And he repeated this over and over until he got the scorpion to a safe place on the riverbanks. The whole time there was another guy on the riverbank looking at this guy, crazy guy, picking up the scorpion, getting stung, picking it up again. And he says, "Why are you helping this scorpion? He's just stinging you over and over." And the saint said something that always makes me think of Amma. He said, "The scorpion is only acting according to its own dharma. I too am acting according to my dharma." Amma cannot do anything but help people, even if they're mean to her. The next characteristic was non-covetousness. And Shankaracharya says it means keeping the sense organs unperturbed in the presence of their respective objects. Jnanadev says, with his metaphorical magic, although the fully blossomed lotus flower follows the sunrise, the sun never touches its fragrance. Even though the beauty of the forest is enhanced infinitely in the spring season, the spring season itself passes on without enjoying that loveliness. In these ways, even if the pleasures of this world and the afterworld become their willing servants, the non-covetous people never allow their mind to enjoy those pleasures. So it's like a philosopher king or somebody who is so concerned with his citizens' well-being that he won't take one thing for himself. He'll live a very frugal life just to make sure that everybody else has enough to eat, and etc. So pure, and have no desire to hoard things for themselves. And actually, in this context, the scriptural context, covetousness is considered to be a weakness of the sense organs, because they they're just so needy that they want everything. So that leads to volatile reactions to those objects of the five senses: food, touch, smells, all these things. So that explains Shankaracharya's, we would say, clarification that we're talking about in the presence of objects. It's okay to not want to have cake or chocolate when it's not around or not in front of you. But what if it's right in front of you, whatever your favorite food is, and then can you just say, no, I'm not going to have it, give it to somebody else, they don't have any food. So that is real non-covetousness. So whatever our hang-up is, food, clothing, money, possessions, beauty, our own or somebody else's, even when such attractive things are before us, we should make our sense organs very calm and steady. That is how to attain non-covetousness. And for that, Amma says that, if we have that intent on the goal, a higher goal in life, all these other things gradually fall away, not like all at once. So it's important to remember our goal, which Amma calls Laksha Bodha. And once we're focused on spirituality as our highest goal, it makes it much easier to relinquish these things, or relinquish covetousness in the first place. A few more to go. The ninth one was Mardavam, which is gentleness, considered to be a virtue. Shankaracharya says it is the absence of hard-heartedness. Pretty easy to understand, right? Jnanadev says it is what the honeycomb is to the bees. Gentleness is what the honeycomb is to the bees. It is water to aquatic animals. It is the sky to the birds, the mother's caress to an infant. In such ways, gentleness is universal softness towards all beings. How can we practice being the honeycomb to the bees? But it means that without that, they can't survive. Without water, aquatic animals cannot survive. So how can an infant survive without the mother's caress? So this is the softness that we're looking for. Softness of character means the opposite of being harsh and cruel. It's softness in dealing with people, and when we say that, dealing with people, especially our words, are important. You will have to be very careful in how we select our words, the tone of our voice, our conduct as we're saying something. The very same words can be spoken in so many different tones. angry tone, arrogant tone, polite tone, gentle tone. So many options. And we can practice this typically with people we like, right? Oh, it's John. Oh, it's Mary. Oh, you're so nice to see you. Oh, gosh, have a seat. Here, let me get you something to drink. But what if the chemistry is really bad? We can't do it for all people because some people, we just don't get along with them. I mean, at present, we want to overcome that, but the realities of the present, we all know where we have hang-ups. When that chemistry is bad or when someone just did something that you didn't like, then just naturally, unfortunately, our character, tone, and language change for the worse. And too often we forget that it's possible to make a point without raising your voice or having a really scary face. You know, we don't see ourselves in the mirror when we're angry with somebody and they walk in the room and you just start scowling without even your own awareness. So has to go. That's the idea. That means that practicing gentleness is a very formidable sadhana. And it's only possible for someone who has patience with others and themselves. Hrihi is modesty, or we could say it's probably closer to shame when we look at what Jnanadev has to say. Shankaracharya says it's just bashfulness. So Jnanadev is going to take us like in the submarine to the bottom of the Mariana Trench now, okay? A defeated king feels depressed and mortified. One with a deep sense of self-respect is dispirited when reduced to the lowest position. That's got to be really tough, right? A handsome person feels it a death blow to contract leprosy. Wow. I guess that would be the worst thing possible to happen for like a model or something. A respectable person has the same feeling when he is accused of a heinous act. In all these ways, one of modesty, now when he says one of modesty, is not the modesty that we know. It is the supreme modesty, because you'll know what I mean when you hear his description. In all these ways, one of modesty feels it a great shame to live as a corpse in a body, to take birth and die again and again, and to be a statue cast of blood and urine in a fatty mold in the form of a womb. Isn't that how you feel, right? Yeah, every day, right? When I wake up, it's the first thing that comes to my mind, right? There is nothing more disgraceful than to take a body and assume a name and form. Right? For a God-realized person, it's like, this is so, embarrassing. My children have taken bodies and forms. I have to get them out of that and back to the pure consciousness. That's how I may feel inside. And then he goes on even more. He says, the nausea felt for such a ghastly body is modesty, and it is felt by pure-hearted people, while the shameless people consider the body an abode of pleasure. Well, sorry, I think we're all shameless people. Not intentionally, but when you're eating something and you're thinking, oh, this is heavenly. So, all right, ghastly body, okay. Just remind yourself, once in a while at least. Modesty, humility, sense of shame. These are all part of that word. And the opposite is pretty easy: immodesty, ostentation, shamelessness, all these things. I mean, it's kind of natural, I guess in Kali Yuga, maybe it's because of this materialistic age. We want to show off our looks, our talents to people. That's the basic materialistic mainstream culture. Blow your own horn, try to impress other people. But a humble person, truly humble person, never touts their own glory, because they understand that whatever talents they have are really only due to the grace of God. And they might even remember that verse in the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, verse 42. Whatever being is there, great, prosperous, or powerful, know that to be a manifestation of a part of my glory. So before that he talked about the Himalayas and the ocean and all these, the elephant and like the biggest and greatest and most amazing things in the world. He said, yep, that's me. That's my glory. But actually, it's just a tiny bit of my glory. The rest of it you guys can't handle. That's how he leads into chapters 11 when he did show Arjuna his complete, glory, and Arjuna's like, stop, I can't handle it. I want to just see the Krishna playing the flute. That's good enough for me. I think he might have wet his pants when he saw that too. We probably all would have. They didn't mention that in the Gita, but the unedited version probably has that there. Achapalam means steadiness. It is not speaking or not moving one's hands, feet, for no reason. That's an example. A lot of us do that, and just without even thinking of it. Jnanadev, I have like a shorter excerpt from him today. The movements of a dancing puppet are stopped with the snapping of the thread connecting it with the puppeteer. Such is the state of the sense organs with restraint of mind. With the conquest of the mind and prana, all 10 senses, I'll explain that in a second, are reduced to complete inactivity. That is steadiness. So why 10 senses? Okay, the hearing, smelling, all this. We know that's what we're familiar with, the 5 senses we call it. But then there's the 5 organs of action, defined by Advaita or Vedanta as like speech, manual activity, movement using your legs, evacuation, that's a doing, right? If you don't go to the bathroom, you're going to be very upset very quickly. So that's one. And reproduction, that's the 5th one. So he says that all of them are reduced to complete inactivity when the mind is conquered. That's the point. And another commentator says, shaking the limbs, means the arms and hands, etc., unnecessarily and fidgeting are symptoms of a lack of refinement, my friends. So, if you want to be refined, or actually, it's not that simple, you'll hear, Amma says some things too. It means to avoid fruitless, useless activities, like as a habit. So nail biting, fidgeting, nervous bouncing of your legs, all this stuff. If we catch ourselves doing that, maybe we can just say, like, is this serving any purpose? Am I less stressed out? Am I less anything or more anything by doing this? Or is it worth saying these things? Or am I just talking because I don't like silence? All these actions should have a genuine purpose. Otherwise, why are we doing them? We may feel that these habits are harmless, but Amma takes them very seriously, believe it or not. I'll share a story with you which is really good for any seeker, but it's tough, tough love. Once, Amma was concentrating on figuring out a timetable for the daily routine in the ashram. At that time, she noticed one of the brahmacharis shaking his legs unconsciously. Maybe he was shaking his legs because he was nervous about the timetable. Am I going to be able to live up to it? Whatever it was, Amma noticed it, and she said, "Son, this is a sign of mental restlessness and impatience. A seeker should learn to sit without moving their hands and legs unnecessarily. It's a habit. They should also not look here and there unnecessarily. Such movements are done by people who have no concentration." Oof. You might have seen people who constantly bite their nails or play with their beard or hair. I think I'm guilty of the beard one. These are cases of mental restlessness or impatience. It's also a kind of mental disease. Spiritual aspirants will try to overcome the mind and its habits instead of being enslaved by such habits. Before making the mind still, before making the mind still, try hard to still the body. Unnecessary movement of your hands, legs, and other parts of the body should be avoided. There you have it. That was the last point of verse 2, and we will move on to verse 3 now. The same way, I will do word by word, and then we'll chant together. Teja Kshama Dhriti Shaucham Adroho Nati Manita Bhavanti Sampadam Daivim Abhijatasya Bharata Bharata. Okay, let's do the whole verse together slowly. Teja Kshama Dhriti Shaucham Adroho Nati Manita Bhavanti Sampadam Daivim Abhijatasya Bharata. What I did here with this verse is I just kind of put a question mark next to the word sublimity because it needs some explanation and it's too hard to do it in the verse itself. So that's the only change I made. Sublimity, forgiveness, fortitude, purity, absence of hatred, absence of prize. These belong to one born of a divine state. And then, O descendant of Bharata means Arjuna. So the first one, sublimity, as it's first translated in the book, is Teja. Now, we have a lot of options for the word Teja, which I will share with you. Splendor is one meaning, brilliance, radiance, luster, which is just pretty much the same thing. It also means light. So you can see somebody, like when you look at Amma, there's such a splendor to her face, radiant face. That's Tejas. And it's even been said that avatars, their body is not made out of the same 5 elements that ours are. Their body is pure sattva. Pure sattva. And that means that's why there's so much tejas, because sattva is the pure aspect that gives brilliance. Remember in the last chapter or the one before, we learned about sattva being brilliant or radiant. So no wonder Amma's face and everything about her is brilliant and radiant. But you can see it in other people's faces too. Sometimes you meet somebody, their eyes are really shiny, or they have just something about their face that is luminous. So that is an example of tejas. Especially if somebody does not just Amma's pujaris, but at your house, if you do your usual prayers and you do like your own kind of manasa puja, you will actually gain, not for that purpose, but there is a tejas in everybody's face when they do that. It's not for that purpose, but you can see it, just so you can understand what tejas is. And Shankaracharya says it's energy, it's also boldness. And even though it's brilliance, he says that's not the brightness of the skin. Very important point. Because, I'm glad he put that, not just because for our edification, but in latter day translations, like from the Western world. They tried to use this as like a class or racial war between the bright and dark-skinned people, which is a horrible way of interpreting this. But he already cut that off at the he cut him off at the pass by saying it's not the skin. And because that was divide and conquer strategy, was to say the northern Indians are lighter in color and the southern Indians are darker in color, so they were always fighting each other. So that was the story that they created. Anyhow, that's a different topic. Jnanadev says, one with a firm mind proceeding along the path of knowledge with a view to attaining the Supreme never feels a lack of strength. Out of anxious desire for attaining the Paramatman, a seeker first destroys the poison in the form of sense objects. It doesn't mean that the objects are poisoned or poison per se. It means thinking that they're going to solve your problems in life, that is the poison. It's our wrong understanding. So that's the point, not that you can't have them at all. And then he runs along the path of concentrated meditation leading to Brahman. In that way, of its own accord, his mind runs towards the Supreme. This is known as Teja. In a broader sense, it includes a person's intelligence, their vigor, skill, all these things. It's an overall brilliance to their being, you could say. And some commentators even take it farther, especially with this verse. You can take it or leave it. It's not necessarily the highest authority. But they say that here, Teja refers also to not changing our resolve due to the sweet words and tactics of others. So let's say you made up your mind on something, I'm going to do an archana every day or whatever it may be, and then someone comes along and then there's always people who help to try to make us change our decisions. So not giving into such tactics or whatever words they say, that is Teja, because it requires a sharp mind to realize that that you could fall prey to such suggestions. The next word is Kshama, forgiveness. Shankaracharya says, it is the state where one is mentally unaffected, even when beaten up or vilified. Vilified means like people just speak very poorly of you. That's tough. How can you remain unaffected like that, really? And then another commentator says, it is the ornament of a hero who has the capacity and the opportunity to avenge the wrongs done to them, but who chooses not to do so. That's the ornament, not the ability to defeat or hurt somebody. It is having that power, but not exercising it. That's the ornament. Instead, they take a humble stance, forgiving and forgetting the wrong. We can call it like patience also, forbearance, all these qualities that we think of as being, part of forgiveness. And actually, because he says they don't feel, or we don't feel disturbed even when provoked. Whatever action is needed can be taken if we have to, like if you're the parent of a child or something like that, yes, you may have to discipline them. But it's not because you're sad or angry, it's for their good. And maybe they will learn a lesson and change. I will share a story, rather personal, but I think it's really, I haven't told it yet, but it's helpful, I think, for people just to understand the process of going from different emotions to forgiveness. There was a woman who used to come here some years ago, and we didn't know, but she had this mental problem, and it came out in spades. It came out in really powerful ways at one point, and it wasn't such a big deal, but I mean, the people who had to deal with her, the women who dealt with her, really, that was took a lot of patience from them, I'm sure. But because it was a woman, I didn't want to be the one to take them to the hospital and all that. There was a lot of stuff going on with that, and I think it was tiresome for them. But then she turned to me, and she started sending me messages and things like that. And that's easy, you can just block it and all that stuff. But then she showed up on the front lawn in her car, and in a beach, and it was what do you call that, like a lawn chair, on the lawn, drinking beer, in front of the Swami house. I thought, does this look good for the Amma's image and the ashram image? Not really. She also put some other things in my mailbox, which I won't repeat. Just not very good things to be in a Swami's mailbox. Anyhow, so I called the police. They came, and they asked me, what do you want us to do? And I said, well, I already knew before she had this mental breakdown, it came to my knowledge that she had kids. And I thought, oh man, if I were a kid, and I wouldn't want to wake up in the morning, look at the newspaper and see the police blotter, my mom is arrested and in jail. So I felt kind of embarrassed about, because she kept coming over and over. She even came at the middle of the night, 2 a.m. That was the last straw, actually. And before that, I even met with her father. We found out who her father was. She was quite old. She was in her 40s. It's not like she was young or anything. Well, she was pretty young, but not a teenager or like a 20s or like that. So her father was quite elderly. He came, we talked about it, we did everything we could to avoid the final straw. But even he couldn't do anything. So, and I realized that, if I were her kid, I would want her to get the help she needed, right? So forgiveness had to take a different form. At first I was embarrassed, at first I was a little angry also, but then I was like, no, if I can help this person, I should. And the only thing I can do is to press charges. And because then what happened is that the police took her and she went before a judge, and she had to get care. She had to go to some place because she was an alcoholic. So they took her, and whatever happened after that, I don't know, but nothing has happened since then. I assume she's doing much better now. I hope so, I pray so. So, but for me, it took me a long time to figure out what real compassion was for her. I hope I chose the right path. Anyhow, it helped me understand a different or a deeper dimension of forgiveness. And the first reaction was embarrassment, confusion, and then a proper response, which was compassionate. But how do we know whether we are responding or reacting? That's the trick. We have to resolve the situation with the minimum amount of mental harm. That's the first guideline. I mean, physically, that heals faster much more than, a wounded heart does, right? So whenever we can compensate with love and patience, we should. But not at the expense of others' suffering. So in the example, there were other people involved, the children. So if I didn't do anything, they would have suffered more because she was just going to do the same thing everywhere else too. Now, when it's a reaction, the key giveaway is that it won't allow us to wait. Let's say you're angry and you say, let's wait for a second. Let's not react in suddenly like that. The reaction will say, no, we have to do it now. We have to say it right away. We're going to go talk to them, or we're going to do something to retaliate, or I'm going to send an angry email right away, etc. But Amma says that we hurt people the most with our careless words. Most of us are not interested in fist fighting and stuff like that, but we do even more dangerous things when we say nasty things to people. So harsh words are probably the most damaging thing that we ever do in our lives. And that's why Amma tells this story that she told a long time ago. I don't know if she said it recently, but it's beautiful. There was a professor who gave a talk somewhere, and there was a big audience, and most everybody praised him all the time. And so after his talks, he would always get emails that, oh, that was so wonderful, you're such a genius, blah, blah, stuff like that. But there was this one woman who sent him an email saying, that was the worst lecture I've ever heard, the worst talk I've ever heard. You claim to be an expert, but you don't know anything. If you don't know anything, it's better not to say anything at all. You can imagine how it pricked his ego. He was furious. He immediately started typing like a spiteful, caustic, poisonous, horrible response to her, choosing as many hurtful words as he could possibly fit in there. And then he was just about to hit the send button. And then he said, wait a second. Let me just read it to make sure I didn't make any spelling mistakes, because then I'll be even more embarrassed, right? So he was checking the spelling mistakes or grammatical mistakes. And in the process of doing so, he realized that he had some real juicy words in there that maybe have gone a little overboard. So he really, the really bad ones, he deleted those and put some different words in there. And then he finished reading the whole thing, and then he thought to himself, let me read it one more time, because just one reading of it, it became so much better. So he read it again, and he replaced a lot of other bad words or mean words with softer and more polite words. And he kept doing that multiple times, and finally he got to a version where he thought, wow, this is really a good letter, and I'm showing receptivity to what she's saying, and then and I'm also making my own points. And he thought, well, it's late, I won't send it now, I'll send it tomorrow morning. So in the morning he rewrites it a few more times, and by the time he was done, you know what it was? It was a love letter. You are so wonderful for pointing out my faults, and I really could use someone like you in my life. Would you like to go out for dinner with me? So Amma says, a little self-awareness can really change your life. I don't know whether they got married or not, but anyhow, it's not the point. Shankaracharya says the difference between forgiveness and the absence of anger is that in the case of anger, mental disturbance arises, and then we have to quieten that disturbance. In the case of forgiveness, no disturbances arise at all, which means that forgiveness, or forbearance, we could say, is one of the greatest virtues. I think forgiveness is a little too much Western, because it means you're, in that word forgiveness, for me, it feels like you're justified to not like what they did, but you're going to forgive them anyhow. It's like they did something wrong, but I'm going to forgive you. Forbearance is different. It's like, I might be wrong also, so I don't react, mechanically or reflexively. The next term is dhritihi. We could call it fortitude, courage, strength. Shankaracharya says it's that special state of the mind that drives away the exhaustion of the body and the senses when they get fatigued, and propped up by which the senses and the body do not droop. You ever felt exhausted or fatigued? Or like your senses and your body is kind of drooping? That means we lack fortitude, courage, and strength, according to Shankaracharya. Jnanadev, again, get ready for a wild ride. Wild passions may get out of control. Dormant diseases in the body may raise their heads. One may be confronted with the separation of dear and near ones, or the association with undesirable ones. Even amidst such a mighty and simultaneous flood of calamities, the one with fortitude stands out firm and unperturbed. There are thousands of hairs on the body, yet the body is unaware that it is carrying their weight. Should a big column of smoke rise up into the sky, it will be easily swallowed by a single breeze of wind. Similarly, if all types of adversity arise simultaneously, these can be swallowed and digested. Taking courage and standing steadfast on such occasions is called fortitude. Who doesn't need that, right? Another commentary is, it is an attitude of mind that serves both as a tonic to and antidote against the weariness of body and mind. It wards off lethargy. Let me read that again. It is an attitude of the mind that serves both as a tonic to and antidote against the weariness of body and mind. Wow. If you could sell that, you would be rich. Unfortunately, we all have to develop it ourselves. Or fortunately, because then nobody can take it away from us. That's the good part. So it boils down to willpower, sustaining power in any undertaking, because in all undertakings, after some time we start to lose our shraddha, our awareness, and our enthusiasm, and it makes it quite difficult for us to continue. So that's when we need perseverance, or you could say a sustained enthusiasm, etc. And all these things qualify. They fall under the umbrella of fortitude. And Krishna is going to talk about it more in chapter 18, verses 33 to 35. The next one, we don't need to talk about too much. Shaucham, it just means purity. It came already earlier in the Gita. And purity has already come up in the first verse of this chapter. But let's hear what Shankaracharya has to say. It includes the purity of two kinds, which is the external, and external purity, he says, is produced by means of earth and water. Well, for us, we don't think of earth, but soap is made out of some kind of earth, right? It's a solid. Even though it's could be liquid soap, there's still something in there that helps it wash off, right, all the dirt. And the internal, the cleanliness of the mind and the heart, is the other kind of purity. And that internal purity constitutes absence of deception, attachment, and other such blemishes. So all these things are called blemishes because they don't belong there. If you wipe it off, then more tejas, more radiance shines from your heart. Jnanadev says, it is like a gleaming gold pot filled with nectar in the form of the water of the Ganges. How precious that is, this purity, wow. Taking to selfless actions and conducting oneself with discernment is the inner and outer form of purity. Did you get that? Taking to selfless actions is the inner form of purity. Conducting oneself with discernment is the outer form of purity. It's like a handbook of how we should live our lives. And one more commentator says, external cleanliness is easy to maintain, but keeping the mind clean is much more important. When the mind is pure, our speech and actions naturally become wholesome. Two more characteristics for us to cover. I know we're going to go a little over the time, but there are no questions today, so it won't be that bad. Adrohaha is absence of hatred, or we could call it freedom from malice. Freedom from malice, I think, is better, actually, when you hear the rest of the explanation. Because Shankaracharya says it's absence of the desire to harm others. So malice makes you feel like you're trying to harm somebody. Jnanadev says, while the holy water of the Ganges flows to join the sea, it cools down the heat of samsara's suffering and also provides moisture to the trees on its banks. In that way, the one free from malice liberates those in bondage, rescues the drowning ones, and relieves the sufferings of the distressed. Day and night, they secure their goal, the happiness and prosperity of others. So literally it means not harming others, which sounds just like ahimsa, right? But that would be a repetition with ahimsa. So Shankaracharya, in his commentary, makes it clear that it's talking about we don't even have a desire to hurt others. Not that we don't do it, but want to. We don't even want to hurt anybody. Now the last quality, amanitvam, or amanitvam, that's what it was. It's elongated because it's na atimanita. It's the absence of pride. Pride consists, according to Shankaracharya, pride consists in having an exalted opinion of oneself. Absence of pride denotes freedom from the thought that oneself is worthy of more respect. So no wonder, people who have a lot of pride get angry. Jnanadev says the holy Ganges felt embarrassed. See, Ganges is described as a woman, as a holy river, as a female river. The holy Ganges felt embarrassed when Lord Shiva bore her on his head. Feeling abashed in that way when honored is freedom from self-conceit. This also came in verse 13:8, when we saw the opposite, pride, comes from a superiority complex, which makes us unable to recognize anyone as being even equal to us, not to mention superior to us. So the absence of such pride means we have neither superiority or inferiority complexes, and that way we recognize everyone as they are, no less, no more. So this is the conclusion of that list of 26 virtues. And remember, Krishna calls it Daivi Sampat. But this is where he gives the name in this verse, the divine wealth. He even says that it is inherited wealth. Really? Did my parents, do your parents, did your grandparents leave you any such divine wealth of good characteristics? Well, it's more like we can interpret it as being the inherence, you can interpret it to be the inheritance that we bestow upon ourselves after much effort across many births. Even then, we shouldn't feel any pride about giving ourselves that inheritance, because we unquestionably received the help of many people, especially Amma, in cultivating whatever good characteristics we may have. Now, I'm going to go back to some verses in chapter 6 that will help us understand how we can possibly leave an inheritance of good qualities to ourselves in a future birth. In verses 40 to 44 of chapter 6, Krishna describes what happens to a seeker who doesn't reach liberation in a particular birth. Like, if we don't reach this birth, what's going to happen to us? This is what he says. There's no destruction for him in this world or hereafter. For none who acts uprightly goes the way of misfortune. Having attained the worlds of the righteous and dwelt there for countless years, he is born in the house of the pure and illustrious. Or he is born in an actual family of yogis endowed with wisdom. Though such a birth on this earth is very difficult to attain. There he regains that level of yoga reached in his former body, and by virtue of this he strives yet more for perfection. By that former practice itself, he is irresistibly carried forward. There's hope, everybody, don't worry. Even if we don't qualify in this birth, Krishna says that in the next birth we pick up where we left off. So that's why we can consider our efforts in this birth to be an inheritance we bequeath ourselves in the next birth. So the question here that might pop up in everybody's mind is, okay, you're calling it wealth. What is the benefit of having this wealth? Can I buy a Ferrari or a nice Rolex watch or something? Krishna is going to give the answer in the next chapter. In the next verses, especially verse 5. He's going to say that these divine qualities support our efforts to attain liberation. But for now, I will leave you with Jnanadev's comments here when he says, these 26 traits should be looked upon as the Ganges, ever full with holy waters in the form of these qualities, or as if these virtues are pure, unblemished pearls in the form of the divine wealth, and churned out of the ocean in the form of the Bhagavad Gita. Wow, what a beautiful ending. But what if we don't feel like we have all these divine qualities right now? We don't have an overabundance of them, that's for sure. What should I do? That's what Krishna is going to explain. That's the next step. He's going to help us to understand what the opposite characteristics look like, so we can identify them within ourselves and strive to uproot them like weeds in the garden. And that's why Krishna will next explain the demonic wealth. Demonic wealth. It's the wealth you don't want, but everybody has it. And we're going to face that next week. Namah Shivaya. We'll close with some prayers, and those who have time can stay and meditate with us for a little while. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Rateshwariye Namaha. Please close your eyes. Check your posture. Slow down the breath by taking a few long, deep breaths. And as you do so, feel the mind and body relaxing further and further. Try to feel Amma's subtle presence all around you. Feel her embrace even as you are watching and meditating. Feel her inside. to slow down the mind even more and make it even more focused. Let us turn our awareness to the rhythmic flow of our breathing process. As you observe the rhythmic flow of the breath, just watch as each inhalation and exhalation peacefully and quietly flows in and out. Now in that quiet, peaceful state, visualize Amma either before you or in your heart. And imagine, as you remember the qualities from last week and this week, imagine those virtues are flowing from her straight into your heart, permeating your whole being. Any one of them. Visualize yourself imbibing all those qualities one by one from the embodiment of that. Every single virtuous quality is fully embodied in Amma. As you imbibe those qualities from Amma, feel your heart becoming lighter and lighter to the point where it is almost still. Now let us close with one more concluding mantra. Take a long deep breath. Om. Purnamada Purnamidam Purnāād Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamādāya Purnameva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long deep breath, and as you exhale, please, you can open your eyes if you please. Om Amiteshwariye Namaha. Thank you once again for joining us. I should let you know, we had a few requests what happened to the videos, so they will be posted. Last week's 2 sessions will be posted. Please bear with us, and we will have them up along with this one very soon. And we will have one more Gita class next week, same time. Om Namah Shivaya.